This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsa Hone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. In today's Top 10, we're taking a look at cards that prevent damage. Damage prevention has been around since Magic's very first set, where it appeared on Healing Salve. However, for the most part, these effects don't tend to be great. Cards that just prevent damage need to find very specific situations to shine, as just preventing damage and giving up a card to do it generally isn't worth it. To be included in this list, a card had to prevent damage in one way or another. While protection technically prevents damage, I excluded cards with protection from this list as I've already done a top 10 on protection itself. In total, there are 454 cards that prevent damage in one way or another, and less than 10% of them have at least one point using my system. Still, there are cards that prevent damage that are quite good, and that's what we'll be looking at in this video. The 10 damage prevention cards that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. The top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Festa Grand Prix is worth 1 point. Before we move on to number 10, let me tell you all about this video's special sponsor, Into the AM. They're an apparel company that sells all kinds of awesome stuff, including this shirt I'm wearing right now. Their shirts all have really cool designs, like this one, which is a Tree of Life, which is a neat looking tree with a trunk made of DNA. In addition to having great designs, their shirts also have a great fit. I am a pretty big guy. I'm 6'3" and about 260 pounds, so normally I can't wear normal clothes that aren't tall sized, but this is an XXL and it fits great. Right now, Into the AM is doing a promotion where you get 3 graphic tees for $60 or 3 basic tees for $45. In addition to that, if you use my special link, which you should see on screen and you'll also be able to find it in the description, you'll get an additional 10% off. I highly recommend Into the AM, so if you're looking for some cool new shirts or other apparel, this is the time to do it. Alright, let's get to the top 10. At number 10, it's Spike Weaver. Like other spikes, the Weaver enters a battlefield with +1/+1 counters, and then can do various things by removing those counters. In the case of the Weaver, it can put its counters on other stuff, and, importantly for this top 10, he can also remove a counter to fog the whole board. Spike Weaver made its competitive debut at Worlds in 1998, where 4 of the top 8 decks were recurring survival decks, which utilized these 2 powerful enchantments in a toolbox deck, which ultimately sought to win the game by reanimating something huge. Spike Weaver was a nice card to search up because it gave you a lot more time to assemble your win, thanks to the fog effect. The deck also featured Spike Feeder, and the 2 of them could work pretty well together to fend off aggressive decks. It was also featured in extended Oath of Druids decks alongside the Feeder, where they played similar roles as utility creatures who bought their controller time to win the game. At number 9, it is Deflecting Palm. The Palm may only prevent damage from a single source, but it also lets you redirect that damage back on the controller. Obviously, this is especially good in situations where someone is trying to kill you with a huge amount of damage coming from a single source. And that's a common enough occurrence in Magic that Deflecting Palm has managed to amass 18 points in Modern. In particular, burn decks like running it there, as it gives them some serious reach, while also hating on strategies that are all about one source of damage. One really nice thing about Deflecting Palm is that it doesn't target anything. This makes it especially nice against decks that utilize hexproof a lot, like Infect and Bogles. It also works well against decks trying to cheat big creatures into play, and it works pretty well against Affinity, which often involves a bunch of +1/+1 counters on a single creature. Basically, Deflecting Palm does a good job of hating on a variety of strategies in Modern, while also giving burn decks an option out of the sideboard that lets them do a ton of damage for only 2 mana. It is likely to continue to show up in burn sideboards in Modern in the future. At number 8, it is Honorable Passage, which is pretty similar to Deflecting Palm, though there are some significant differences. They both prevent damage from a single source, but Honorable Passage can also prevent damage that would be done to a creature. Passage doesn't always redirect the damage, though. It's more of a red hate card, since it only redirects the damage back on the opponent's face if the source is red. It was featured in sideboards in Block, Standard, and Extended, and it managed to gain points as a result of both of its standard legal printings. At number 7, it is Moment's Peace, which is the only straight-up fog effect to make this list. We did see Spike Weaver earlier, who can remove a counter to make a fog effect happen, but it isn't just a fog, while Moment's Peace is. Fogs tend to need very specific environments or decks to excel, since going down a card to prevent combat damage for a turn just isn't what 99% of Magic decks want to be doing. However, because Moment's Peace has Flashback, it actually prevents 2 combats worth of damage with a single card, and at that point you're getting something much better. It also benefited from the fact that there was a Madness Threshold deck in block which could easily take advantage of Moment's Peace from the graveyard. It was also played in standard Mirari's Wake decks, which needed several turns to ramp up their mana, and using Moment's Peace a couple of times was a great way to do that. It was used in ramp decks and extended too, including Heartbeat of Spring and Blue-Green Tron. It hasn't gained any points since 2008, but it is probably the best pure fog effect in the entire game. At number 6, I have Maze of Ith, a land that has a pretty flexible damage prevention effect. While the Maze is a strange land in that it doesn't produce mana, the ability is pretty real. You can use it on your own creatures to save them from a block that isn't advantageous, and you can also use it on an opposing creature to make it so that it can't damage you. It was played in the early years of the game, and even got restricted in 1994, meaning you could only play a single copy of it in your deck, and it was later banned and extended. The Maze frequently made games long and uninteresting, and it was restricted and banned in large part because of that, and not how good it was. The Maze has found the most success in Legacy Lands, which, as you can probably tell from the name, is a deck with a bunch of lands in it. It runs various cards that let you tutor up whatever land you want, and Maze of Ith is generally a singleton card in that deck, since sometimes it's pretty critical to find it. It is going to continue to gain points in Legacy going forward, and is likely to move up this list. At number 5, it is Eiganjo Castle, another land that prevents damage. In this case, the castle can prevent damage that is dealt to legendary creatures. That effect can be pretty powerful, especially on a land, as it can really make combat a nightmare for your opponent, and it also makes your legendary creatures harder to kill with damage-based removal. Eiganjo Castle is basically just a Plains with upside, since it comes into play untapped, and as a result, the cost of running this in your deck is quite low. It won't hurt your mana base at all if you're playing white, it just brings some extra value. It is legendary, which means playing more than one of these is not the best idea, but the first copy of it should be in just about any white deck that has at least one legendary creature. Luckily for the castle, there have been prominent white decks in several formats that have a few legendary creatures, and also have a need for white mana. Both block and standard were loaded up with legendary creatures, so it was played a significant amount in those formats. In modern, it's been used to protect creatures like Vendilion Click and Geist of St. Traft. It has also been played a fair bit in Legacy Death and Taxes deck, which features some legendary hate bears like Thalia and Kataki. It doesn't have any points since 2020, but it's pretty likely it'll gain more going forward. At number 4, I have Circle of Protection Red. Obviously enough, there's a whole cycle of Circles of Protection, and they're all white enchantments that prevent damage from a certain color or from artifacts. But this Circle of Protection is the only one that has enough points to make this list, and that makes some sense. Red is renowned for its ability to do a whole bunch of damage, and for running out of gas if an opponent can prevent damage or gain life. So a Circle of Protection is way better at shutting down red decks than it is any other colors. As a result of all that, it's been played in a lot of white sideboards over the years in standard and extended, though these days there tend to be better ways to hose red, and as a result, it doesn't have any points in a very long time. At number 3, it is Burrenton Forge Tender, another damage preventer that hoses red. The Forge Tender is one of the best cards around at countering burn decks, since the protection allows them to block their creatures as long as you need, and the sacrifice effect prevents damage from an entire burn spell, something that is difficult for burn decks to recover from. As a result of this usefulness, the Forge Tender has seen play across multiple formats where it's a potent sideboard weapon against burn. It doesn't have any points since 2018, but if the metagame ever shifts toward burn decks, you can bet the Forge Tender will be adding to its score. At number 2, I have Dromoka's Command, a modal card that includes an option to prevent damage from an instant or sorcery. It does a whole lot more than that, of course, and it does it for only 2 mana. For example, if your opponent has an enchantment, you can make your opponent sacrifice it, and then fight one of their creatures with your larger creature. You can also set up blocks, make one of your creatures big enough to survive combat with the +1/+1 counter, and then use another creature to fight something else. The damage prevention effect isn't chosen that often, but it does come up sometimes. While in Standard, Dromoka's Command was a format-defining card, as it was one of the most played cards in the entire format. It had no problem transitioning to new decks as others rotated out of the format. In its early days, it was mostly featured in Abzan, but then it moved on to Megamorph, Green-White tokens, and Collected Company. It also has a few points in Modern, but it doesn't have any points since 2018. And at number 1, I've included 3 cards since they're all Gideon Planeswalkers. Gideon Ally of Zendikar is a legitimate number 1, Gideon Jura would have been at number 4, and Gideon of the Trials would have been number 10. One of Gideon's recurring abilities is that he can turn into a creature that prevents all damage done to it, and that's what makes them all eligible for this list. Gideon of the Trials even has an additional damage prevention ability as his +1. Gideon, ally of Zendikar, is obviously the best of the bunch and was a format-defining card while in Standard. The ability to churn out tokens, attack as a 5/5, or give you an Anthem is pretty amazing for 4 mana. His highlights in Standard came in decks like Abzan, Selesnya tokens, and Mardu vehicles. He's picked up top 8s in Modern decks too, like Abzan, Junk, and Hatebear, and he's even seeing play in Legacy, Death and Taxes, and Miracles. Gideon Jura has been played a lot across multiple formats, but not nearly as much as ally of Zendikar. In addition to being able to become a 6/6 that prevents all damage done to it, he can also force creatures to attack him, and he has a -2 that kills a tapped creature. Obviously, the +2 and -2 go well together, as you can make a creature become tapped with the +2. Gideon Jura has been played primarily in Control decks in Standard, Extended, and Modern. Lastly, there's Gideon of the Trials, who in addition to becoming a creature, can prevent damage done by a specific creature, and make a pretty interesting emblem that makes it so you can't lose and your opponent can't win as long as you control a Gideon. Of these three, only Gideon, ally of Zendikar, is actively putting up points. Still, Gideon Jura has a high score that will likely keep it on this list for a while. That's not as true of Gideon of the Trials, though, who would have barely made this list if he was given his own slot. Well, those are the 10 cards with damage prevention effects that have had the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you're interested in using these cards to prevent damage, you can buy them at Card Kingdom. In the description, you'll find an individual link for each of them. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. If you want to see more of my Top 10s, you should see the playlists on your screen shortly. Lastly, if you like hearing me talk about Magic, you might also listening to me talk about history, which I do on my other YouTube channel, Nietzsche History. You should see a link to that channel shortly. Thanks for watching.